It is 10:07 a.m. Today, Ms. Bruno and Ms. Cook will be assisting us through a review of our policies and procedures and some statutory implications. In the interest of time and efficiency, we're going to stick with the agenda, and any issues that you have will be entertained in Monday's workshop agenda. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Bruno, and welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Dr. Atkins. Good morning, Ms. Cook. Today we're going to go through two very specific things. One will be parliamentary procedure, and then we're also going to go through some board policies that discuss governance of the board. So first, if Mr. Eldon can go ahead and get the slideshow up for us with regards to parliamentary procedure, and we'll start there with the first slide. You know, I have participated in different assemblies, some from 50 individuals to some nearly 1,000 individuals. And the way that we are able to manage those meetings is through Robert's Rules of Order. And Mr. Henry Robert has a quote that I like, which basically says that really a small amount of study, just learning the fundamentals of Robert's Rules of Order gives such a great result in the efficiency in how we move our meetings along. So the goal today is to refresh, to recollect, and maybe learn something new on parliamentary procedure so that we can apply it to our meetings and have the most efficient meetings that we possibly can. We have a board policy that discusses Robert's Rules. Specifically, board policy 1.11 talks about the board meetings. All of our school board meetings are to be conducted pursuant to Robert's Rules of Order. Any formal action to be taken by the school board has to occur at a regular action meeting or a special call meeting or a public hearing. In addition, the school board attorney has the task of being the parliamentarian for any of these meetings. Some of the things I want you to be aware of when we're talking about parliamentary procedure is the basis for it, why we need it and why it's important. Parliamentary procedure helps all members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. The majority vote decides, but the rights of the minority must also be protected. It is a full and a free discussion of every proposition presented for decision-making by the board. In addition, every member has the right to know, what are we talking about? What is this motion on the table? And what is the effect of this motion will have? All meetings should be and must be characterized by fairness to all members, and we must always act in good faith. Part of Robert's Rules of Order, believe it or not, is forming an agenda, and how is that agenda actually formed and decided. So we go back to our board policy 1.11, and it states that any item to be considered for action by the school board has to be on an agenda of a regular meeting, and it shall be submitted to the superintendent no later than 14 days prior to the meeting. Subsection 4B of 1.11 states, no business shall be conducted at any regular or special meeting which does not come within the purposes set forth by the agenda or the reason for convening the meeting, unless it is changed for good cause or addressed during the board member comments, which we call good of the order. Subsection 4C states, the agenda for action meetings shall include a consent agenda, which is to help us expedite actions in routine manners. Now, a member of the board may request at the meeting that any item be removed from the consent agenda and addressed during the unfinished business portion of the agenda. No vote is required to do so, just that the member has requested it that it be removed. Now, we also, in addition to our policies, in addition to Robert's Rules of Order, we also have the board manual. And in the board manual, it gives us some additional specifics as to our meetings and the operation of our meetings. Number one, if possible, board members should try to notify the superintendent within 24 hours of any items they wish to be pulled from the consent agenda. Two, provide a memo to board members with the reason behind the pull so that the board members are prepared to discuss it at the next meeting. Notify board members in a memo if you want to introduce an item during the briefing. If not enough time, if you don't have enough time, you are able to bring it during good of the order. Strive not to make new proposals at action meetings because we want the board members to be fully informed and aware as to what we're going to be talking about. So new proposals just don't give us enough time to do that. When you are submitting your memos, board members, please be careful. We don't want to reply to all because we don't want any violation of sunshine. You are able to submit a memo for consideration at the next action meeting, and that's where you will be talking about it. But do not reply to all in these memos or emails. So when we get to the meeting itself, what do? Well, we have our consent agenda. We have different items that we're going to be talking about, and there's two ways to go about to address those. One of them is through consensus. Consensus helps us move things along faster. It's not an actual vote because remember, your vote is at an action meeting or a special meeting. But this allows the board to know where does everybody stand at this time. It's an ability for us to work collaboratively. The only thing that I will recommend for the future for the board is any consensus vote that you take, that you ratify that at the next action meeting so that there's never any questions as to where the board stood on a particular issue. Now, let's say we can't do it by consensus or we are at an action meeting and we need to actually take a formal vote. What do we do next? How do we address things? Well, the first thing is to remember that nothing really is supposed to be discussed without a formal motion on the floor. And I know that sometimes we do have discussions and there is some latitude for a board this small. However, I really want our board to move forward in being as formal as possible and apply Robert's rules as much as possible, because I think it will help us with the efficiency of the operation and the running of our meetings. So at this point, nothing really that's going to be discussed can be discussed without a proper motion being on the floor. How do you get the floor? So you basically notify the chair, you can raise your hand, and the chair will recognize you. We can't really just kind of butt into the conversation or just jump in. We really need to have some processes and procedures to make sure that we control the meeting. So if you want to talk, you make sure that you get an acknowledgement from the chair, she recognizes you, and then you can go ahead and participate. Once you have the floor and you want to make a motion, what do? You need to say, I move that. And I would ask that you also write the motion down. It's really important that we keep accurate minutes of what is being discussed and what is being decided upon during our meetings. And the secretary must record it precisely. She can't come up with her own words. So if you write the motion down ahead of time, then the chair will know what the motion is because the chair has an obligation to repeat the motion. You will know specifically what your motion is, and the secretary will know what the motion is. Next, in order for a motion to proceed to the floor, it needs a second. And you can say, I second the motion or second, that's fine. I know we discussed last time with regards to motions, we want to avoid saying so moved. We really want to be follow the Robert's rules as much as possible and specifically say I move. And Carol, I'm just kind of curious as to other districts. How are they applying the Robert's rules when it comes to motions?
Yeah, we are working on that with Florida School Boards Association because sometimes people will just say motion, and that isn't following Robert's rules. You must be able to state what it is so that everyone, not only the board members, but everyone who is listening or participating in any way, shape, or form knows exactly what they're talking about. Some people, in some districts, they will say, I move the superintendent's recommendation. Well, that's fine, but the people that are in the audience that want to speak to specific items also may not know what the superintendent's recommendation is because they don't see it in front of them. So we're really encouraging them to, and although we, kind of say Bob's rules sometimes, because sometimes we have the discussion before we make motions and get a little out of whack, we really do stress that you state the entire motion before you even begin the discussion. And as your attorney said, do it exactly in the wording that you want, because that's what you'll be voting on.
Thank you. So once the motion is made and the chair has seconded the motion, the next thing we need to do is have a discussion or a debate on the motion. Normally, the chair will just open it up for discussion or debate, and then you guys can move forward and have that discussion. Now, let's go to the slide that says consideration of the motion. Members debate the motion. Before speaking, you have to obtain the floor. And normally the person who has made the motion is the first person who gets to speak because it's their motion. They get to speak first. And then you really want to try to have varying viewpoints. So if the person is for the motion, they speak. Try to see if there's anybody who's against the motion. Let them speak. And then we kind of go back and forth. So we have a well-rounded picture of what the issues are. In addition, debate can be closed only by a two-thirds majority, which for us will be 5 individuals, 5 members. Anytime you want to limit, close a debate or limit in some way the discussion, it really does take a 2/3 vote. And you'll see that as we go through the rules. Now, Robert's Rules does designate how we, move about on trying to have this discussion. What order do we go? So we know that the person who made the motion first will have an opportunity to speak. Each person can have 10 minutes to speak. That's the default rule in Robert's Rules. And we go 2 times around. And if we really want to make sure everyone has an opportunity. So if someone has not spoken yet, we will defer to that person so that we have the full, everybody has that chance. So we're not going to let, one person have 3 chances and one person didn't even have an opportunity yet to speak. We want to balance that out. Pursuant to our rules, if a motion is not stemming from an agenda item, we must have public comments on that motion. And I want to talk a little bit about courtesies during the debate. One thing I always want the board to remember is that we are being watched. When you're on the dais, not only are the students watching you, the parents are watching you, other officials are watching you, the community is watching you. So the way that you, your decorum on the dais, the way that you handle your discussions on the dais is extremely, extremely important because we're leading and you are leading by example. So we want to make sure that we listen to what everyone has to say. We're respectful when they're speaking. We're respecting the time and the limitations that is set by the board or by the chair. We stick to the subject. Let's try not to get off topic. That happens a lot, and we want to be careful. If the motion is about A, let's not go to A plus B plus C. Stick to the motion. And I think it's always difficult sometimes to not bring in personalities. But if we apply Robert's Rules properly, we should be able to avoid bringing in personalities and just addressing the business at hand. For example, one of the tips, and this is even something that Robert's Rules would ask us to do, is don't address each other. Address the chair. So, Madam Chair, I have an issue with regards to this, and this is why I believe that. Instead of saying, well, board member so-and-so said this, and I want to address what board member said. No, we want to address everything to the chairs because that's kind of like our a neutral, should be our neutral person who's going to be making rulings and making decisions during the meeting and leading the meeting. So that's the best way to do that. I don't know, Carol, if there's anything you can add to that from what you've seen from other districts.
Yes, I have. This is extremely important. In one of the districts, actually in Florida, they were having some problems with this. And a middle school student came to their board meeting and called out the board members on their behavior. And if you really stop and think about that, when we say that they're watching, we say that we're seeing it, but it was in their face that this student came up and said, you ask us and expect us to behave and respect the teachers in the classrooms, but you don't respect each other. And that was a big part of his, excuse me, his conversation. And that was a real eye-opener. I don't ever want to be sitting at the dais and having a student come up and call us out. So I would hope that we would remember that. Many districts have written civility policies, and they'll read those at the beginning of the meeting and not only expect the attendees that are coming and speaking to the board, they'll also expect the board members to follow it. And it's a good reminder for many of them that have been having some problems. So you may want to consider something like that as well.
Thank you, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about bringing the motion and the time period that we want to exercise when we're discussing something. But let's say that you feel that discussion is getting too long and you want to give a reasonable length of time for the question. And the question means the motion. That's just the formal way that Robert's Rule addresses motions, is by calling it the question. So let's say you want to do that. So after recognition, Madam Chair, I move to limit the discussion to 2 minutes per speaker. Again, anytime you're trying to limit discussion, it requires 5 votes. Let's say that you think that the discussion has gone on for too long and you want to actually stop the discussion. Then you would say, after recognition, Madam Chair, I move the previous question, which means bring it back to the motion. And while we're here, let's go ahead and take this vote and end the discussion. Again, you're limiting the ability to speak. It requires 5 votes. Now, board policy, and this is gonna go back to the public comments, and we're gonna talk throughout this presentation a little bit about public comments, but I wanna bring this to the board's attention where I get this information about the public comments. Board Policy 1.11 5A2B, if a motion is made by a board member and seconded to take an action not in response to a recommendation of the superintendent or the board attorney, an opportunity will be provided for individuals to comment on the subject of the motion. It's very important that we remember that part, that we do need to have the public comment. Now, so at this point, we've had our discussion. The motion is on the floor, properly seconded. We've had our discussion. What happens next? Next, the chair has to put the motion to the vote. The chair says, are you ready for the question? That, again, is a formal way that Robert's Rule uses. Remember, question means motion. But she can also say, are you ready to vote on this particular motion? And if no one else claims the floor, then she will proceed with the vote. The chair says the question is on blah. So what does that mean? Prior to the motion, the vote, we again state what the motion is. We must always state what the motion is. So when you're basically raising your hand, I move that we adopt the superintendent's recommendation to have a new football field, then it's properly seconded. You guys go around the table, you have that discussion. Is there any further discussion? No, there isn't. Are you now ready for the question? And the question that's on the floor is to adopt the superintendent's recommendation to add this football field. At that point, you will vote. And I know that we have our fancy way of voting on the dais. You will go ahead and use that fancy way of voting. And then once the vote is taken, the chair then must announce the vote. The motion carries by 7-0. The motion fails by 5-2. So everybody is on the same page. The audience knows what is going on. When you are watching our meetings on YouTube, they do not see those screens that are on the side. They have the electronic count. So if the vote is not announced, the public who is not actually physically in the building will not know what happened with the vote and what the numbers are unless we announce it. Let's talk about, I like the motion of having the this additional football field at this high school. However, I think that we probably need to add some particular language in terms of, and I'm making all of this stuff, of course, the length or the or how long or how wide or something of that nature. So I want to amend the motion. I want to add an additional word to the motion. So how do you do that? Madam Chairman, I move that the motion be amended by adding the following words. Well, I don't want to really add words. I want to take words out. Madam Chair, I move that the motion be amended by striking out the following words. I want to do a combo. I want to add and strike out. Madam Chair, I move that the motion be amended by striking out the following words and adding in their place the following words. So if you can see that if you actually have the motion written down and your fellow board members know exactly what your motion is, it's easy for them to add or strike out or do a combination so that we can move forward with that amendment. So once the amendment is done, and this is where it can get a little complicated, we have an amendment on the floor. What are we actually voting on once we do the amendment? Remember, you guys still have an opportunity to discuss the amendment, but when you are voting on the amendment, you are only voting on the amendment. You're not voting on the amended motion as stated. So let's say you're adding, let's say the motion is, Madam Chair, the motion was to have red flowers at a particular ceremony. I would like to change red to blue. I would like to amend the motion to reflect that it's a blue flower, or I want to change the motion and add blue and yellow, whatever it is that you want to add for that amended motion. When you're voting, you're only voting on the words blue and yellow or blue. You're not voting on the underlying main motion, okay? Then someone says, well, I want to also add green. That's a secondary amendment. You can do that, but you can only have two. You can't have more than two. Now, let's say that you vote and now you're voting on the blue, yellow, and green, and the motion, that amended motion passes, then you go back and you vote on your full motion. Carol, I don't know if you want to add anything to that part, because I know sometimes that can be confusing.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that if you really look at it logically, you've got to answer one question at a time, because eventually you will have the main motion that you're voting on, but you need to know, is it going to be just on the red flowers? Is it going to be on the red and the blue and the yellow flowers? It's going to be red, blue, yellow, and green. So if you're taking each one, do you want the green flowers? Yes or no? Is basically what it boils down to. Now, do you want the blue and yellow flowers? Yes or no? Then you come up with the final, okay, this is what we're planning on doing. It will be the red and green flowers. But look at it logically and just chip away at it one piece at a time, and don't get overwhelmed by the fact that there are so many rules and so many steps that you need to go through. It can be overwhelming, but just look at it logically.
Thank you. And then sometimes you may say, I don't want any of that. I want to substitute the entire motion. And you're allowed to do that. You can substitute a part of it, you can substitute a whole paragraph, or you can just substitute the entire motion. Madam Chairman, I will move that to substitute the pending motion for the following motion. and then that will go to a vote. Now, let's say that I don't agree and you want the membership to have more time to consider the motion or / the question under discussion, and you want to postpone it to a definite time or day and have it come up for further consideration. You're not prepared yet, and you don't think that the body is prepared yet to have a vote on this motion. After recognition, Madam Chairman, I move to postpone the question until our next meeting. Let's say that you think that this is something we just really don't need to talk about it at all, and you actually want to kill the motion, make it completely go away. That's called postpone indefinitely. And you would go then say, after recognition, Madam Chairman, I move to postpone the question indefinitely. And Dara, we're on the next slide. And then now we're going to go to how to withdraw the motion, which is the next slide. How to withdraw the motion. I made the motion and I kind of heard all the discussion, and some of my board members have raised some valid points. And I think that I don't want to move forward with this motion anymore. Madam Chairman, I ask permission to withdraw my motion. Now, let's say that at the beginning of the meeting, the agenda was adopted, and then you're finding that the chairman is not following the order of the approved agenda. Without recognition, you can just say, call for orders of the day. Let's go back to our agenda that we adopted. Let's say that the agenda has been approved, and as the meeting is progressing, it becomes obvious that there's an item that you're really interested in and you think that it needs to be moved. You can say, after recognition, Madam Chairman, I move to suspend the rules and move item 5 to position 2 because I think it goes more aligned with what we were talking about in position 1. That's fine to do that, and of course, that takes a vote. Now, let's say that you are in a meeting and that you feel it's too cold, or you can't hear, or there's some type of issue that's going on without recognition, point of personal privilege. And then when you do these type of point of order, point of personal privilege, point of parliamentary inquiry, the chairman has to make a ruling on that point. So the chairman will say, well, state what your point is, board member. Well, my point is I can't hear, or it's a little cold. Can they put the AC up, turn it down a little bit? Those are personal privileges. And then the chairman will say, okay, can we please turn down the AC, or let's see what we can do so that you can hear better. Those are points of personal privilege. But you do have to let the chair know what the issue is. So let's say that you don't think that the rules are being followed. I rise to a point of order. I have noticed board members do that, where you will say point of order, point of order, point of order. And then that's it, point of order. You need to state what the point of order is. Point of order, Madam Chair, I think that we are not following the issue is outside of the bounds of what we're talking about. It's not germane to the motion on the table. Or point of order, I think that we are not discussing this properly because I think we forgot to look at this, or whatever it is during the discussion. Then the chair has to make a ruling on that point of order. And she has to say, okay, your point is taken, we will go and do this, or what have you. Okay, so point of order is not just saying point of order, we need to have the backing behind the point of order. And it will be the chair that makes the ruling on that. Point of information. Let's say that you're listening and then you realize, wait, I need some more information on this. So you can say, point of information, Madam Chair, could you please find out if we need to have someone from finance to come in, and is there something else that they can offer to clarify this matter? That's a point of information. And then sometimes you feel like we're not following Robert's rules. We're way off down. Somebody has been speaking for 15 minutes, or somebody has spoken for 3 minutes, or somebody spoke without being recognized. That's point of parliamentary inquiry. You're confused about something, and without recognition, point of parliamentary inquiry. And you can also say point of order if you feel that somebody is not following the rules as well. So like somebody is speaking for more than 10 minutes. Point of order, board member is going beyond the time limit that was prescribed, and then the chair will make a ruling on that. I don't know, Carol, if there's anything you can elaborate or add as to what other districts are doing or what FSBA is recommending with regards to all of these different types of points that can be raised during a meeting.
Yeah, no, I think you have pretty well covered it. Are you going to get into, I don't remember seeing it on the slide, the difference between postponing something and tabling?
Well, why don't you go ahead and talk about it? I think it is, but you can go ahead and talk about it too.
Okay, because a lot of times people will use those two terms interchangeably, and it's not necessarily the case. Well, it's not the case at all. When you are postponing, you can postpone it to a date specific, or as discussed, postpone indefinitely. A lot of people will say, let's just table this item. Well, if you table the item, it must be brought back. There must be a motion to bring it back, and it's at the next meeting. If you don't do that, then it dies. And people sometimes will say, well, we'll just table it and discuss it later. You could lose the motion entirely. Mm-hmm. So that would be the only thing that I would add. So be careful whether you're postponing or tabling. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, Robert's Rules does also provide us guidance on when we're doing nominations and elections. We're not going to nominate by motion. We're going to nominate by nomination. So the chair will say, nominations are in order at this time for whatever it is. And then someone can say, well, I nominate board member A, and someone can say, I nominate board member B. Chair can say, are there any other nominations? If not, then the nomination is closed, and then we can vote on it. Let's say that there's only one candidate that is nominated. Then you can just elect by acclamation because there's no other nominations. Okay? Chair's responsibility. The chair is responsible for the meeting. The chair is responsible for making sure that the meeting runs smoothly. And she has access to the parliamentarian to assist her, but it really is the chair. So you will see from time to time that perhaps a question is posed by a board member, and the parliamentarian does not respond directly to the board member. The parliamentarian responds to the chair because the chair is running the meeting. This is her meeting. Now, and as well, the board members should be directing everything to the chair. So the chairwoman would add a good cause. She runs the meeting. She can pose the question, which is ask for the vote. She restates the motion. Sometimes a member is thinking of a motion and doesn't know exactly how to word it, or may word it and it doesn't encompass everything. And the chair understands what she's trying to say. She can help her with the wording of the motion. That's okay. The chair rules if a motion is not in order. She brings forth the motion to the body for debate and discussion. She processes the vote and announces the results of the vote. She also makes sure that the rules are followed and judges if the rules are not followed. And there's also some additional things and responsibilities of the chair that is in your board manual. Let's say that you don't agree with the chair's ruling. Then you also, as members of the body, can say that. How do you do that? You appeal the ruling of the chair. If you disagree, Madam Chair, I appeal the decision of the chair. It does need a second by a member. And then in this particular scenario, members only speak one time. However, the chair may speak twice. And then the chair, the vote will be posed, which is, again, remember the question. The vote will be posed, and the vote is whether or not we're going to sustain the chair's decision or not. Okay. Sometimes we utilize custom and habits. And Robert's rules, does specifically say when there is a custom, it should never violate the rule. It also says if you are an assembly of 12 or less, there could be some flexibility. My recommendation to this board, because of the meetings that we have had, is that we try our best to follow Robert's rules as closely as possible. Believe me, it will make a difference in how the board is operating in its meeting. Makes it very, very efficient. It's very clear. It's also clear to the public. It's very professional. And I think that would be my recommendation to the board. I don't know, Carol, if you have anything to add about that.
No, I think you got it covered.
Okay. Now, the other section that we have is good of the order. So we've had our meeting and we have had all our motions and everything. Now, we call it board member comments or attorney comments or superintendent comments, but this is for the good of the order. So what can we do during the good of the order? What's the purpose of good of the order pursuant to Robert's rules? Well, the good of the order is for the members to offer comments or observations on how the organization is doing. You can discuss whatever you want to discuss during good of the order. And pursuant to Robert's rules, this is also a time that if there's a motion that you would like to make that was not part of the agenda, you can do it at that time. And also pursuant to Robert's rules, this is the time where you can discuss any perceived offenses committed by a member or specifically from Robert's rules, it talks about disciplinary charges because Robert's rules, of course, is trying to help the assembly. And sometimes there may be some issues or discussions on what some members may feel to be perceived offenses to the body. I don't know, Carol, if you have anything to add to that one.
Well, I would be very careful about that section. Actually, many of the districts have changed it to items introduced by the board members so that it gets away from picking at personalities or their hurt feelings that happen during a meeting. Because sometimes in a real intense conversation and an intense, and we also use the word deliberate, even though Robert's rules use debate. We don't want it to get back and forth and who's going to win. And that's normally kind of what you perceive with a debate. But the deliberations can get intense. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. And sometimes things are said that maybe shouldn't have. And so rather than using that time to go back and say, this is what happened, we encourage it to be what items need to be brought forward so that the district can move forward and the district can get better. It's not about you hurt my feelings or you said something. If there was you misunderstood a statement that I made, you might want to clarify the statement just for the record. But we really try to use that for the business of the board as opposed to personality issues that Ms. Dupree mentioned earlier that you try to stay away from during that. This is where boards get into trouble. This is where it turns into a free-for-all. So if you remember all of the other rules of Robert's rules and try to self-impose them during that period of time, I think you'll come out ahead. And I know y'all fall into that occasionally, more often than you probably should. So that's an area where you need to really, really think about how are you using that period of time? And is what you're going to say beneficial to the district? Not, is what I'm going to say make me feel better? Okay.
And I'm going to reiterate again, during the entire process, we want to avoid the personalities. We just want to conduct the business of the district. If we can do that, we're going to be ahead of the game at all times. And I'm not saying that we can't talk about concerns. You can always talk about concerns, but always make sure that when we're talking about the concerns is as it relates to the district and not about the personalities. That's key. Okay? All right, so thank you, Carol. Now, what is the parliamentarian's responsibilities in all of this? Well, the parliamentarian there is to advise the chair in responding to points of order and other parliamentary inquiries. For the most part, really, the parliamentarian's job is done prior to the meeting. So the parliamentarian will talk to the chair. Here's some issues that may come up. This is how I recommend that you address them. A lot of that stuff is done behind the scenes so that when you do go to the meeting, it's very smooth and it's very efficient and everybody's on the same page. But during the meeting, the parliamentarian can, again, advise the chair. It serves purely as an advisory role, does not make rulings. Again, this is the chair's meeting. The parliamentarian can back up the chair, but it's the chair's meeting. And we want to make sure that we adhere to each other's roles. Now, there is one thing that you guys have in your board policy, 1.11.5A2E, which talks about inappropriate or irrelevant remarks can be ruled out of order by the parliamentarian or the chairperson. And this is left strictly to the parliamentarian or the chair's discretion. I looked into this a little bit. Go back to the last slide, please, Daryl. I looked into this a little bit more with regards to the parliamentarian's responsibility, and you'll notice that you have a lot of materials from Jim Slaughter. Mr. Slaughter is an attorney, and he does a lot of parliamentarian work, and he is a guru on parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order. So believe it or not, I was able to get a hold of him over the weekend to discuss this particular slide in terms of parliamentarian responsibility. And the discussion was that the Robert's Rules of Order is very clear as to the parliamentarian's advisory position and not making rulings. But it kind of depends on what's going on with the board as well, because Jim has cases where he's clearly just as an advisory all the way to where he's actually making the ruling because the board only trusts the parliamentarian to make the rules. So it depends sometimes on the dynamics of the board. So I just wanted to point that out. It depends on what the conversations are with the chair and what kind of assistance does the chair need in basically running the meeting. Some chairs may need more, some chairs may need less. It really kind of depends. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Daryl. Thank you. Decorum, and this is with regards to decorum in the meeting itself when we have members of the public, but this should also be decorum for us. And I think most of the board members know a little bit about how to present themselves at the meeting. Again, if we take out the personalities, I think we'll even do much better. But improper conduct at school board meetings, including booing, hissing, clapping, shouting, cursing, or disrespectful comments to school board members. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Disrespectful comments towards school administrators and other individuals shall not be tolerated, nor shall the school board tolerate other behavior which the parliamentarian or chairperson considers disruptive. Applause is accepted only when an award is being presented. 7B, which is the next slide. Presenters shall confine their remarks to educationally relevant issues. Attacks on individuals and abusive comments shall not be allowed. Speakers who fail to follow this rule shall be ruled out of order by the parliamentarian or chairperson. Next slide. If an individual continues to violate these rules at school board meetings, the chairperson may issue a warning that a continued violation will result in the removal from the meeting. If the individual continues to violate rules after being warned, the chairperson may order the individual removed from the meeting. And it is unlawful in a second-degree misdemeanor to knowingly disrupt or interfere with the school board meeting. So one of the questions that keeps coming up is, what is a personal attack on the board, on an administrator? What does that constitute? Because sometimes we do get some pretty ugly comments, or we may get some comments of concern that we feel are unjustified from the public, or we may get just nonstop bombardment on various topics and it just goes on too long and we think we got the point, but we want them to stop commenting on the same thing. So one of the things I want to caution the board and let the board know what my philosophy as your new parliamentarian will be, is I'm going to err on the side of the public being able to make their comments. And the reason I think that we need to do that, in my research of this, and I want to share a little blurb here that's not in your PowerPoint. Once the floor is open to the public, the board generally may not treat speakers differently based on the content of the message. If it's good content, we can't favor that more so than if it's bad content. And I'm taking this from Justice Hugo Black from the United States Supreme Court in a case, Tenney versus Brandhove, 341 U.S. 367. The right of every person in this country to have a say, however unorthodox or unpopular it may be, or the opinion may be, is guaranteed. So I want to be very, very, very careful that we're not muzzling the public in any way. So here's going to be my guide in determining whether or not something is in violation of our board policy. If the comment is abusive, defamatory, or derogatory in terms of race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, religion, political beliefs, disabilities, ethnicity, nationality, political affiliation, or things of that nature, then I will say it's out of order. If it contains defamatory, not defamatory, but curse words and things like that, then we will rule that out of order as well. So I just want to be very, very careful. And Carol, I don't know if you can add to that.
I know that that is sort of a general stance that most of the boards take, but some of them will also say, if for example, a person's coming in, they're complaining about their student's teacher. If their teacher is named, they will ask them not to do that. They can speak in general. They can say, my child's teacher has done blah, 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 blah. But we draw the line in many of the districts with naming people. Or we also try to let them know that they are being televised. If they start talking about situations that, health situations or something with their children, where they're sharing a lot of information, not telling them to stop, but just remind them that, this is televised. And if they want to continue with the conversation, that's fine. But, they forget, they come up, they have an issue that is very important and valuable to them. And, they forget what they're saying, to whom they're saying it. So we try to stop at names and stop at sharing too much information. But again, it's their choice as to whether they want to continue sharing their students' information.
Now, and I'm going to just add to what Carol said. So if something like that happens where someone is coming in and specifically naming a teacher or something like that, we will make sure that we let them know that we would prefer them to, one, address specifically the board versus individuals, and that would include a teacher. I think that's if I'm correct, Carol, that's pretty much the norm of how everyone is doing it throughout the district. Mm-hmm. But I also want the board to be aware that there are cases that address this. There's actually a United States Supreme Court case, Noter versus Galbraith, where a father who had a special education student went to a board meeting and just really tore into the special education teacher. I mean, really reamed her out at the board meeting. And the teacher sued. And this is the, not United States Supreme Court, I'm sorry, the Supreme Court of Florida. The Supreme Court ruled that that was not enough. Because even though that happened, there was not enough malice. He came in to talk about how upset he was about how his child was being treated and not having these special services and how this teacher was behaving. So I want to keep that in the back of our minds as well when these things happen, that sometimes they're going to be a judgment call. I have the law in the back of my mind that I'm trying to protect the board and the district, and make sure that the public has their opportunity, at the same time adhering to our norms and making sure that there are no real personal attacks on our staff. And I'm going to try to avoid as much as possible with the board members, but you guys are public officials, so that's a completely different standard. And unfortunately, Dr. Atkins also, as the superintendent, has a different standard, okay? Let's now go to what we are doing right now to accommodate our virtual meetings, because this is a little bit different and it's a little harder. So I think with our virtual meetings, we really want to make sure, pursuant to Robert's rules, that all of our members can fully participate. Robert's rules does allow for telephonic and these type of virtual meetings. That's not a violation. But Robert's rules also says that when you're having these type of meetings, you must make sure that all members can fully participate. So if a member says, I'm having difficulty, you really are supposed to kind of stop and figure out what's going on to make sure that that member can fully participate. I made a recommendation. This was, I believe, our first meeting that we had where a motion was made outside of an agenda item or recommendation for the superintendent. Because of our board policy that says that we need to have public comment, and we have been taking our public comments through the emails, and we, since prior to me coming on, Mr. Quick has been reading those emails. I think we need to continue to do that because that's the precedent that we have set. And so to ensure that the public has their voice when we have these motions, I recommended to the board that we give them at least 5 minutes for them to send in public comments so that we can also read those in favor or in opposition to any motion. Another thing, board members, I want to caution you. When you are on these Zoom meetings, we can see you and we can see everything that's happening behind you. And if you're on your phone or if you're on anything, any type of electronic devices, we can see you. So just like we do in our face-to-face meetings when we're on the dais, board members, again, no communication between you, and then try not to have any electronic devices with you at the dais. And also when you are in your Zoom meetings, really try the best that you can not to have anyone join you in those meetings. I know these times are tough and sometimes kids run in and out of rooms, but we do the best we can to adhere to the decorum and not have additional individuals. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Carol, in terms of virtual meetings, if anything from the districts. Okay.
Yeah, no, you're good.
So you guys have some cheat sheets that we supplied you with. There's a chart from Mr. Slaughter. There's some, I don't know, Daryl, if you have that. I don't know if you can pull up those cheat sheets for them. Just give him a second. I know he's going to pull it up because I want to show it to you.
While they're waiting, one thing I will say about the cheat sheets, when you get back to sitting at the dais, slip it under your blotter so that you can pull it out and refer to it occasionally if necessary. And, just have it handy because it's nice to have it, but if it's in a file, it's of no value.
Mm-hmm. While Daryl's still trying to pull that out, I'll just go through some of them. We have this really great parliamentary motions guide. Yes, there you go. Thank you. We have this wonderful parliamentary motions guide. Just like what Carol was saying, make sure it's easily accessible to you. I'll have my cheat sheet as well as all of my books. And I will tell you, board members, I have like 4 or 5 books on parliamentary procedures. So I'll have all my books with me, have the cheat sheet. It should help us with motions and making sure that we have a proper hearing. We also have a little blurb from Mr. Slaughter as well, leading effective board meetings. Granted that the chair is responsible for the meetings, every board member has an obligation to assist in the efficiency of the board meetings. Every member has a stake in how the board meeting is run. So I would encourage you guys to also read the leading effective board meetings. You can go down there. I think it's probably page number 3 on that document that you have. We also have a little cheat sheet on how to handle emotion, some of the verbiage, so that you know how to handle emotion, as well as some parliamentary strategies. There is nothing wrong with preparing yourself to argue for or against emotion. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you saying your concerns. Nothing wrong with that. It's the way that we are saying it and the way that we are going about doing it. Am I right, Carol?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in your little handouts, you have something called parliamentary strategy, how to help adopt emotion. And go down a little bit, Daryl. I think it's the next one. Keep going. Keep going. This is the handling the motion worksheet that you have. Okay, here's the parliamentary strategy. So this provides you how to help to adopt emotion, defeat emotion. That's all fine. We can do that. I think you have 2 pages of that. And then how to preside like a pro, again, from Mr. Slaughter, gives you some tips. And then there's an article on consensus. This is a board. The more that you can try to collaborate with each other and work with each other and not lose focus as to why you are here, which is for the betterment of our schools and our students, the more you can reach consensus. So there's a little article on consensus. This article also talks about how are you guys reaching consensus? Are you doing by unanimous vote? Are you doing it by majority? I think traditionally this board has done it by majority, which is what I would recommend that you continue to do. I'm not sure if you're going to have a lot of unanimous consensus on this board. One other thing with regards to consensus. You guys have been doing this. That's good, but it's not helpful for the secretary and it's not helpful for the people who are watching you because sometimes we just can't see these. There's no way we can see them. So my recommendation is at this point that we move forward to having regular votes. In your mind, as you're processing the information, you can determine, is this something I can live with? Is this something that I can actually live with and digest? If you can't, just vote no. If you can, then vote yes.
Now, I have a question with this. Are you talking about strictly at a board meeting or in workshops? Because I don't believe the law allows us to vote at workshops.
No. They are they're doing these for their workshop, but they can't do formal action votes. They can't do formal action, but they can say, I agree or I don't agree.
Okay, with moving forward with something or, okay.
Right.
All right, I just want to make sure, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but they can only have actual action votes at an action meeting.
Right.
All right, and then there was actually something here, I believe that also discusses parliamentary procedure that I found in the gold mine of wonderful resources left by Mr. Martin. So I also attached that for you in the back of your resources. Okay. At this time, Madam Chair, that ends the presentation on parliamentary procedure. And I don't know if you want to take a couple of minutes because it's 11:05 now.
You're muted, Mary.
Okay. Yes, so there may be some questions, and I do see a hand raised. If you go into the participants thing and pull that up and raise your hand using the program, that's helpful. But in the meantime, I'll call first on Ms. Gittens. She has a question or a comment.
Yes, the question that I had was on what you just discussed about doing the consensus vote. And I've seen both ways. This is kind of for you, for our attorney and Carol. I've seen both ways that when there is a consensus vote taken and one person does it sideways, that they can live with it. I have heard some groups, the chair will say, well, what is it that we can do to help you go one way or the other? Is that procedural? Is that just being nice? Is that something we should adopt and do? I'm not sure about that.
I will jump in, and then Carol, you can come in too. I know for the consensus vote, that's part of it. That's actually part of that process of trying to figure out how can I bring the group together to try to make a consensus? What can I do? So even if we're doing an up or down vote, and there is a couple of people, because remember, we're not really taking a vote. We're just kind of figuring out where everybody stands at this time. So even if you see that, there's a few people that are down, you can still ask them, well, what is it? What can we talk about? Because that's the whole point of trying to reach a consensus, is to collaborate and try to reach an agreement. I don't know, Carol, if you want to add to that.
Yeah. Maybe rather than confusing it with taking a vote, you're expressing where you stand at that point, what your thought process is when you ask for consensus. But absolutely, if someone's saying, I'm really having a hard time, or they're saying, I just can't live with this, and to ask, what are the issues? How can we get there? And maybe you can. The goal is to get 100%. The reality is it may not happen that way. And so what is it that's keeping you from being 100%? What's keeping you from saying, yes, I can do this? And you may find that what is keeping you from that is not something that can be overcome. It also could be tweaked, and we add this to it, and now you have buy-in.
So, and can I just make sure that I understand what Attorney Bruno was saying, rather than, the thumbs up and whatever? It's not a vote, but to verbally take the consensus of each person so that it is recorded and everybody is on the same page. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, because the issue isn't the consensus part of it. The issue is that we can't see the thumbs up, sideways, down. The public can't see it, and sometimes it's actually hard for your secretary to be able to see it and see what's going on and follow. So this was just a way for us to be able to be a little bit clearer in terms of what we're doing, but the whole thought process behind the consensus does not change. It's the same thought process.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to Ms. Patrica, and it is 11:09. So
Two quick questions. First, writing the motion down. We should be providing each other with notice when we're going to bring a new motion to the table at an action meeting. And should that include the written motion in advance? So for example, last meeting, I did the FSBA thing. I made those motions. I did not provide them in writing in advance to the board, but I did discuss it at the previous meeting. So should we get into the practice of providing those motions? Please do not reply in advance of the meeting.
Yes, I would recommend that we do that. It's definitely helpful for the board. It's helpful for the chair because she can repeat the motion properly the way that it's stated. And it's definitely helpful for the board secretary who has to record everything.
All right, and my second question is in terms of the use of electronic devices. I thought that the previous board had a discussion that cell phones were not allowed at the dais for an action meeting, but they were permitted for workshops and briefings. So I just wanted to get clarification surrounding that.
I don't have any rules that addresses that pursuant to the policies that I reviewed. I'm going to defer to Carol. What are districts doing on that?
Most are trying to discourage cell phones from the board meetings. As far as workshops, it's not happening everywhere. They're all discouraging it, but there are people who have childcare issues, or we've had, and I know in our district we had a board member whose mother was in the hospital, and so she had it on in case she needed to, because she was taken to the hospital the day of our meeting. And so, there is some flexibility for emergencies and that type of thing, but most boards are trying to say, not only don't use them. Some are saying, put them in a drawer, put them in your purse, do something so that your cell phone is not distracting you.
Okay, so then do we as a board need to decide whether we want that to apply to all meetings or just action meetings? Because up to this point, it was only action meetings from what I understood. Kathleen, I'm sorry, Ms. Morgan, Ms. Fisher, do you recall that conversation? And should we make a change?
No, I do recall the conversation, and I think that we had some members using personal computers at the dais, and I myself have found it very helpful to have my phone available, although it's off, to check my calendar when we're planning to move forward. So I think some flexibility, in my opinion, is that some flexibility would be reasonable. And I have 3 hands up now. I have Ms. Giovanelli, Ms. Jordan, and Ms. Vaughn. Ms. Morgan, did you have a comment or? No, okay, thank you. All right, so I don't know that we want to do anything about this right now, do we, Ms. Bruno?
No, I don't. I think we can bring that up when we do when you guys do your evaluation on Monday. That could be something that is brought up at that time.
Yes.
I am a little bit concerned about time because it's 11:13 and we haven't gone to the next topic. Right,
and that's what I was just going to say. So if I can entertain the next, Ms. Giovanelli, if I can entertain your question quickly within a minute or two, and then at 11:15 we'll move on to the next portion of our agenda.
Okay, so I just have a question. So sometimes we get emails or the superintendent polls us on things. Is that something that is it'll come back at a vote later? Is that something that is okay to do?
You're talking about,
and sometimes it's not even a vote. It's just
one thing with regarding to the polls. If it's something that's going to come to the board for a decision, we need to be careful with that.
It's not always. Yeah, it's not always that.
And it's not always that. So that's why I'm making that distinction. And I don't know, Kara, what are districts doing about that?
Yeah, polling technically is illegal. That is the superintendent calling and saying, how are you going to vote on this? How are you going to vote on this? And that's the distinction that's being made. If he's calling and asking your input, that's a very different thing, and that's okay, as long as he's talking to each board member and getting their input and then moving forward with a decision. In addition to that, in individual meetings that you may have, subjects may come up and he'll ask an opinion. That doesn't necessarily mean that every board member is now going to have to be called, because in a normal conversation, an opinion is asked. But mostly the distinction between, is it going to be something that comes to the meeting on which the board is going to vote, and he's wanting to find out, do I have 3 out of 5 votes? That's very different than asking your opinion as the leadership of the district is looking to move forward.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay then. And Ms. Vaughn, if you could hold your question, I'm gonna turn this back over to Ms. Bruno so we can move forward, because it is 11:15 and we're only scheduled till 12. But at the end, time permitting, we will entertain any other questions. Thanks, Ms. Bruno.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to go to the next group of slides, which is about governance. And we're going to start with the School Board Philosophy Policy 1.06. So this is what I want you as a board to always remember. Why are you here? What is it that you're here to accomplish? And the School Board of Lee County governs with an emphasis on its well-defined purpose: improve student achievement. So everything that you do, everything that you talk about, every step that you take in your role as a board member, remember what your purpose is to improve student achievement. So therefore, how do we do that? 1, lead with vision by keeping the focus on the future rather than the past or the present. Empower through processes. Encourage and listen for the diversity and the views of all in the community. Lead strategically. Create a clear distinction between school board and administrative roles. Make decisions based on factual information. Make decisions collectively rather than individually. Govern proactively rather than reactively. Policy 1.03, the authority of the school board. And I've given you guys some statutes and Article 4 of the Constitution. We won't go through that, but that's what all of this is based on, those statutory regulations. Let's go to the next slide, Daryl. The School Board of Lee County is responsible for the operation, control, and supervision of public schools. That is from the Florida Constitution, Article 4. The district is empowered to determine the policies necessary for the effective operation and the general improvement of the school system. Next slide. The school board shall exercise any power except as expressly prohibited by state constitution or general law in performing its responsibility to operate, control, and supervise all public schools in the district. 3, the role of the school board is to act collectively, not individually. Individual members of the school board have authority to take official action only when sitting as a member of the school board in public session or when the school board specifically authorizes a single member to act on its behalf. 4, the school board of Lee County shall not be bound in any way by any action on the part of an individual board member or an employee except when such statement or action is in compliance with the collective public action of the school board. The superintendent, school board attorney, and school board internal auditor shall take direction only from the school board, not individual board members. Neither the board nor individual board members shall give any direction to district staff. Policy 1.04, school board responsibilities. Again, this is coming from the statute. Let's go to the next slide. The Lee County School Board will establish policy, which will provide a rigorous curriculum that will prepare all students for the workplace and or post-secondary education and enable them to become productive citizens. The board will direct the superintendent to. And then I don't put in there everything that you are directing the superintendent to, because you can look at the policy which is provided to you, but I want to give you the subject areas that you're providing direction to. So the board is coming up with the policy. I want to be very clear on this. The board is coming up with the policy and then directing the superintendent to implement the policy. Okay, so 1, the Lee County School Board will establish policy which will provide a fair and equitable work environment for all employees. Next slide. The Lee County School Board will establish policy which will ensure the efficient and effective use of the district's financial resources. Next slide. The Lee County School Board will establish policy which will develop parent and community partnerships to enhance student learning. The school board shall review and revise its protocols annually. And then next slide. Then I took this from your board procedural manual, page 18, which discusses what the school board's responsibility is and what the superintendent's responsibility is. So the school board governs, guides, and directs. The superintendent administers and operates and manages. The school board decides the what, here's the policy, and the superintendent decides the how. How am I going to implement that policy? The school board requests information. The superintendent seeks and provides the information. The school board considers issues. The superintendent provides recommendations for those issues. The school board creates, reviews, and adopts the policy. The superintendent implements those policies. School board monitors progress, and the superintendent reports the progress. The school board designates positions, approves job description, and acts on personnel nominations. The superintendent directs employees' work, recommends jobs duties, and nominates personnel for positions. The school board approves evaluation criteria and procedures for personnel. The superintendent supervises and evaluates the personnel. The school board reviews and approves the budget. The superintendent formulates the budget. The school board represents the public interest. The superintendent acts in the public interest. And Carol, I'm going to ask you to add and elaborate a little bit on the governance and management.
Yeah. I want you to step back for a second and think about what's going on right now with the coronavirus. It just seems like a thing that all of us can relate to and what's happening. There was a crisis, and every moment count. And so the hospitals are making sure that they're being busy and they are taking care of the patients, and they're doing everything that they can because they want to make sure people aren't dying. Now, they have a board of directors, they have hospital administrators and staff. What are the board of directors doing right now? What are you hearing in the news right now about the board of directors getting into the hospitals, and what are they doing? You don't hear anything about them. You hear about what the hospital is doing, you hear what the administrators are doing, and you hear how they're attacking the problems and how they're changing their procedures in order to meet the needs of what's going on in the hospital. Now, if you take that and put it into a school system, how did the administrators know what to do? How did they know what was going to be okay and what's not okay? It's because of what the board of directors put in place with their policies and their procedures for the administration to follow. So we need to do the same thing as school board members. We set the policies, we set the procedures, we set the expectations. The strategic plan is part of that. Your policy manual is part of that. And even your protocols very likely address some of the expectations of the board and the superintendent. So we don't get into the day-to-day operations, just like the hospital boards don't get in and start telling the administrators of the hospitals, you must do this and you must do that and you must do the other thing. Now, the administrator may be calling the board to get some guidance and some direction. They may be calling and saying, guess what? We have a situation here that we were not counting on, and we need to reallocate funds. We need to, in order to keep the business of the hospital running. But the board of directors are not running it. Just like you, as the board of directors of your school district, don't run the school district. You govern. So if there's ever a question about what do you do, and is this governance, is this management, it's very simple. Are you asking how something gets done, or are you asking what is going to get done? The how is the management. The governance is what. So as board members, we say, this is our expectation. This is what we want to see happen. Now, in your case, Dr. Superintendent, make it happen. And they go and decide how. They decide who's going to be there, who's going to be the person in charge of whatever. What is the process for how they're going to be doing any particular subject or task. Our authority comes in through law, but it also comes in through policies that are set. It also is by the job descriptions that we establish and that we as board members agree to. But once, for example, with a job description, once a job description is made and you have put in the criteria and approved the position to be hired, as long as the person that is that is being recommended meets that criteria, we accept it. You can turn it down if they don't meet the criteria of the minimum qualifications. But you have put the structure in place. Now, literally, you allow the superintendent the freedom to go make it happen. How can somebody move forward when they have 7 individual bosses telling them what to do, what to change, what to happen on a day-to-day basis? It's very, very difficult. You find yourself zigging and zagging and going in all different kinds of directions. But if you have set the parameters and allow the superintendent to move forward, that gives them the opportunity. But they don't go forward without having to come back and say, here's the progress we're making. This is where we're going. It's that progress monitoring. It's the checking back. It's the evaluating the methods and the outcomes for the students. That is the most important. So it's not set it and turn them loose and goodbye, good luck, hope it all works out. It's set the process, allow them to do the management, so you still have that governance, and then evaluate the progress that is being made. You can also determine how often you need to see input or bring back feedback as to what's going on. If you're asking that the superintendent incorporate a program or start another program, you could say, we're going to move this forward and go make it happen, but bring us results in 6 months and let's see if we're making any progress at all. And then you may see that that's working, and then you may ask for a year from now. So it's not having somebody just go do whatever they want and hope that they're staying within the policies and the parameters that are put. There are checks and balances, and that's important. But you cannot hold a superintendent responsible for doing a job that you've asked them to do if you then get into their business and start telling them how to do it. If you're telling them how to do it, you're the one that should be held responsible. So again, governance is important, and if you look on the sheet that was just up, and it doesn't have to go back up, you'll see that the superintendent does a lot of recommending, and the board adopts and puts things in places. And you do the monitoring, you do the adoption of the goals and the processes, and you put the policies in place, you have the budget in place, you have the job descriptions in place, you have set the structure in which a superintendent operates. Because we went through all of that. So it is, again, when in doubt, am I asking how this is to be done, or am I asking what is to be done? We want to make sure that the schools are being treated equitably as opposed to equally. Then that's what you set out for the superintendent to do. The superintendent then comes back and reports what is happening, what is going to be, how are the resources, not just financial, but people, how are resources going to be distributed so that there's equitable resources, and what else is happening. Some schools are, when we were having longer periods of time that the schools needed to be if they had not made the proper grade. That came back to the board, I'm sure, as to start times and ending times, but not who's going to teach what at what time of day during that period of time that they have for extra instruction. That's the superintendent's responsibility. Okay. So I put a timer on so that we wouldn't go too long with this whole thing, but it's important that you know your role, but the most important thing is that you honor those roles. If you are not honoring that, you're going to have problems. It's just that simple.
Carol, so at this time, because I know this is an issue I really want the board to understand, I would like to open it up for questions for about 10 minutes or so before we finish up with the 1.05, so that board members can ask their questions, and Carol is here to answer, I'm here to answer. And one thing before we open it up, I don't have this cartoon, but I want you to imagine something so you guys can see what equitable is versus equal. Imagine that you have a 5-year-old and who's about 3 feet, and you have a gentleman who's about 6 feet, and you have a teenager who's about 4.5, maybe 5 feet. They're all trying to look over a fence to be able to see this NASCAR race. The gentleman can see very clearly over the fence. The teenager probably needs about a foot or so to be able to see, and then the little 5-year-old needs at least 3 feet to be able to see. If you put them all on the same ground, you'll say, well, you all have the same access, you're all at the same fence, you're all at the same footing, that's equal. But to be equitable, you need to give the little child at least 3 foot, something he can stand up, maybe some boxes or something, so he can really be able to stand up and see. The teenager may need a box to be able to about a foot or so they can see, and then the gentleman, he can see no problem. So there's a cartoon that says that, and that's how I always remember the difference between equal and equitable. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I want to make sure everybody has their questions answered with regards to governance and management.
Okay, Mary, do you want to call on the people, or shall I just call on them as their hands are raised?
You got to unmute, Mary.
You're muted.
Okay, yes, I'll be happy to do that. I have Ms. Gittens first, followed by Ms. Vaughn. Miss Gittens.
Unmute yourself.
Okay, how's that? Okay.
Yes,
my question is, you mentioned the coronavirus and what is going on, and basically that is so totally different that it creates for us a new way of work, a new way of looking at things, totally different than we've ever had. So we do not have the policies or the direction to deal with that because we've never dealt with it. Mm-hmm. And my impression then is, like you mentioned, the hospital board. No, they're not saying how the masks are going to be distributed or whatever. But if there are major changes and things that have to be done, they are aware, they are involved. It's like, okay, yes, we need to shift our budget from this to this. We need to shift our focus that we were doing this over to this, and kind of providing that and making sure, like you were just saying, that there is that equity and equality. So to me, as a board, since we've never done this, we don't have those policies. Mm-hmm. So I'm listening, and I have been watching other districts at what they are doing and discussing those types of things, like, okay, how overall, not telling the superintendent how to do it, but as a governance group, we discussed this and we looked at all the parameters and think, we really need to make sure we focus on this. And that's my concern, that we do that piece that, yes, is our responsibility to do. And that is our involvement. That is our inclusion, to be able to look at the data, look at everything and say, we need to make sure. Now, how many teachers you send is up to you, or how many, whatever. Okay.
Okay, and what you're saying is accurate in most parts of what you said. However, there are policies for emergency situations that you have. And so that parameter has even been set as to, here it is. Now, does it fall into the situation where you cannot get together and meet? What do you do? So there are some things that are in place. as you're trying to figure out how you deal with this situation, there should be conversation. There should be, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? But it is still you staying in your management position. Just as you said, you're not telling them how many teachers to do what. You're not telling them how many computers versus how many iPads are going out to the classes. I mean, out to students that are in need of it. You're saying, let's get as many laptops as we can, or as many devices into the hands of students as we possibly can. That may be the governance part, but how, who, and when is the superintendent's. Now, I wasn't trying to specifically talk about the coronavirus. I was talking about what does the board of directors in a hospital do in a crisis? Because I consider education in a crisis right now. Every moment counts. Kids are falling by the wayside and dropping out of school. Kids are, every day counts for what they are or are not learning. That's the same urgency that the hospitals are having. And in a horrible situation in a hospital, the governance board is able to stay at the governance level. So we have the same crisis going on every single day that we are working with our students. We need to stay in the governance level and allow our superintendents to do the work that they're supposed to.
Thank you, Carol. Ms. Vaughn?
Okay. Well, Carol, hi.
Hey, Betsy.
You're familiar with this board, and so you know that we're often a split board. And I think a lot of this, and I do have a question, I think a lot of this comes up from not that we don't understand, some of us who are bigger questioners, not that we don't understand, but that perhaps we have different attitudes toward results, that we set policy, we have expectations, that sort of thing. And we, looking at the progress monitoring across the board, that we're just unhappy with some things, some of the ways that things are being implemented. So my question is, as an individual, is there anything that we can do as in the context of the board as a whole, when we're sitting at the dais, as an individual, what do you suggest that we do to avoid other members of the board jumping in and saying, that's not your business?
Well, one way.
You understand what I'm asking? Does that make sense?
I think so.
That we don't have the, to us, no, the policies aren't being handled the way we think they should be handled.
Okay. There are a few ways that can be handled. One, first time, behind closed doors, one-on-one with the superintendent, and share that information. The second is examine what processes you have in place. For example, if it's progress monitoring, do you have a progress monitoring calendar? Because you cannot monitor everything every single month or every single day. So do you have, when are we going to be looking at our reading scores? When are we going to be looking at math scores? When are we going to be looking at what's happening with the achievement gap, whether it's Hispanic or the African American achievement gap, or both? Do you have progress monitoring calendar? Because you should be, and I try not to say should very often, however, you should be monitoring these things, and you have to do it on an ongoing, regular basis. What happens too often is whatever the crisis du jour is, that's what ends up being brought up, talked about, and then never really finalized, because you don't have the data at that point in time when it's brought up to say, this is what's happening and this is what's going on. If policies are being violated, again, that's something that, you know, it may even be the attorney and the superintendent and you sit down and talk. But look at the processes as well as the policy that you have in place. Now, as far as board members saying that's not your business, well, check yourself. Is it? You know, are you overstepping? Are you, that terminology, getting into the weeds? And if you are, step back. If you're not, or you want more information, again, you can talk to the superintendent and say, help me understand this, what's moving forward, but it's not yours to go in and say, but I want this instead. I want you to handle it this way. That's not our business.
And Carol, let me just add to that. Definitely do the self-analysis. Am I really pretty much out of my bounds where I'm supposed to be? But for my purposes, as you guys are doing your meeting, I want you guys to be careful with how we are speaking to each other and how we are listening and respecting each other in the meetings. There's a way to say, wait a minute, should we look at this a little bit more carefully? Is this where we're supposed to be? Versus, you know, this is none of your business. So I just want to make sure, because I really want the board next time we're having our meetings, and from now on when we're having our meetings, that our meetings are professional, efficient, and we're not getting public comments about how messy our meetings are. So this is part of the reason why we're having these workshops today. But I definitely agree with Carol as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, there's communication, and it goes two ways. One is, are you saying it in a way that is polite? You can say some pretty rough things in a very polite way, not to be a got you, but to get your point across in very difficult conversations. The other piece is, are you listening and looking for, see, I knew they were going to get nasty. I knew she was going to do it again. Are we listening for the bad stuff and saying, yep, I was right. There she is. There we go. So I would suggest you try and say things in a very polite manner, respectful manner, but also try to listen to what a person's heart is saying, rather than sometimes words that may be a little harsh, and cut people some grace on all sides.
Thank you, Carol. Ms. Giovanni?
Thank you, Carol. So I think as a board, we've not worked together, and the reason is because I've been one has asked some hard questions. I feel strongly about accountability and oversight, and I take it to that to the extreme. I ask questions, and I'm not allowed to receive copies of things when I want it. How do we go about that? I went over 6 or 8 months not able to even talk to the superintendent. He refused to meet with me. So how do we know? And the board didn't allow me to even do that. So how do we address these things if we can't have the conversation that's needed?
Okay. One of the slides talks about the commitment that you've made, and it was focus on the future rather than the past. So let's start there. And if you have a clear, and another one is having a clear distinction between the administrative roles and that of the board. And I don't remember how it is. I think it was between the board and administrative responsibilities or roles. So having that clear decision. One portion of it is, how much time is it going to take to get that information? Another question is, how deep a dive are you going? Now, if you have, and I'm going to go back to this, this calendar of looking back at when are you going to get specific data so that you can have it. That's when the questions can be, okay, what's happening here? What's happening at this school? What's happening at these two schools? What's happening at our schools where we have the most struggling students? Those conversations can happen during that particular time. What you do with the information after you receive it makes a difference too. And we don't want to get into a position where we're asking so many questions and asking for so much information that staff is so busy just getting our stuff that they can't do their job. And then we turn around and say, but why aren't you making gains? Why aren't you getting your job done? Because I've just spent, if every single one of you asks for 1 hour's worth of documentation, information, whatever, you have taken a full day. That's 20% of staff time. So when you're talking with the superintendent and say, here is, and I'm going to go back to the two of you haven't spoken, you need to get over it. You're both adults and you need to say, we're going to go in, we're going to try this again, and this time we're going to make it work. Okay? So that's a start. Then you go in, and I think it's appropriate for a superintendent to say, why do you need this information? What are you looking for? So that they can get you the best information. Sometimes what happens is we ask for something, but that isn't really giving us the answer we want. So we ask for something else and we ask for something else. Meanwhile, we're buried in data, we're buried in stuff, and we still don't have the information we were looking for. So if we can be as specific as possible, that helps. Secondly, information that needs to be held confidential needs to be confidential. Information that is necessary for you to have may need to be shared with the entire board. Those conversations need to be happening so that you know how you're going to move forward. But if it's accountability, set those times for accountability discussions and have them. Did that answer your question well enough? No? Okay. Yeah, we'll have some more opportunities, okay, but if I can give you any more right now, that's fine. But we'll have some more opportunities in the next session and our last follow-up that we can delve deeper into this if you want to.
Thank you, Carol. And I'm going to add just a little bit more at the end, but we do have a hand from Ms. Patrica, so I'd like to give her an opportunity.
Carol, one issue that comes up frequently is the acquisition of employee investigative files. Is that in the board's lane? Is that in the superintendent's lane? How should we go about handling requests for employee investigative files?
In most districts, I don't know what the law says in this particular section. In most districts, they don't touch the files. They don't look at it. They send it through, OPS or whatever the investigation group is, and then take the superintendent's recommendation. Now, that also gets into if a person is questioning the agreement or the outcome and they don't like it and they want to move forward with a hearing, then the whole role changes. Then you do get everything. And Ms. Dupree, you may want to get into this, but for a standard, whether somebody's going to be suspended for a day or whether someone is going to be removed from, and the recommendation is to fire someone, that conversation can happen with the superintendent. Why? What happened? Give me the thing. And there should be like bullets or something so that you know generally why this person is being recommended for whatever disciplinary action. But to look through the files and things like that is overstepping our role.
Okay, so there's two questions. Whether or not legally can I have it? Yes, you can have it. Whether or not you should have it is, I think, what Carol is talking about in terms of your role. Now, I will say this. Next week, we're going to have the pre-brief on the ethics and education policy. And I think that pre-brief, when you look at the policy that's being generated, I think it's going to help the board members and help some of the board members feel very comfortable in terms of the process that we're working on for these types of things at this time. I know that HR is working on revamping their process as well. The equity office is working on their process. We're trying to bring it into a little bit more towards what some of the other districts have been doing, as well as making sure that we're complying with one of the seminal cases, which is Laudermill. So we are working on that, and I think that next Tuesday you guys will have more information. And hopefully, because of this new policy that's being in place and the new processes, this discussion won't even have to come up anymore, because the board will feel comfortable that now you have a policy that is addressing your concerns. So you will have the what, and then the superintendent and his staff will have the how, okay? Because you'll have the policy. I don't know if there's any other questions. I think this is productive. So, Madam Chair, if there are 5 more minutes on this question, and then I can go through the ethics pretty quickly, if the board would just give me an additional 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, and that was going to be one of my questions. Mr. Eldon, are we cut off automatically at 12, or do we have some leeway?
You have leeway.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no other hands up at this point, so.
Madam Chair, if I may, I believe the superintendent has to leave slightly before noon for that press conference. So do we want to continue in his absence?
Okay, Dr. Atkins?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I know the governor is coming on at 12 o'clock, and, you know, I was hoping to be able to see that. I mean,
right.
I can have staff view it and catch me up, but, you know, it doesn't. So, I mean, as long as we're quick.
Okay, all right. Well, we have no other hands up now, so why don't we just go ahead and proceed, and then if you have to leave and there still are a few things and which I'm going to talk about, Master Board and the Pandemic Task Force, so I can catch you up on that. Okay, so go ahead, Ms. Bruno.
Thank you. So now we're going to go to, thank you very much, Carol, for those answering those questions. I'm sure there's going to be more that will be coming. Policy 1.05, I'm not going to go through every one. I do expect the board members to review this. This is about your conduct and the ethical conduct on the board, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. I just want to reemphasize again that everybody is watching. So we need to make sure that when we are presenting ourselves to the public, that we are presenting ourselves in a way that we're not going to have individuals calling or commenting that they don't understand how the board is treating each other and that how the board is conducting business. So that is one of my goals as your new school board attorney, is to assist the board to be able to address some of those concerns. And as you know, we're going to have these attorney workshops once a month, and this was the first one, and I think the most pressing one. So every board member needs to be committed to ethical and business-like conduct, including proper use of authority and decorum, consistent with maintaining the integrity and discipline of an effective board leadership. We're going to go to the next slide. Next slide. You can read A, B, C, D, and E on your own. I would like to go to community conduct. I think we discussed that this is just pretty much a remuneration of something that we've already discussed before in terms of individual members and honoring. We need to get to the point, and this is in your policy, board members. We need to get to the point that we can honor the right of individual members to express opposing viewpoints, their vote, and their convictions. Just because a board member does not agree with you, that does not mean that, you know, they're not able to express their own opinions. We need to respect the board, and I am concerned about that, and I want us to really work on that particular aspect of the policy. B, we've already spoken about. That's from another policy as well. I'm going to go to 3A. I think Carol has talked about this, and I'll just reemphasize: respect the authority of the superintendent for administration and management of the schools and district. And let's go to boardmanship conduct. I would like to go to D. Okay. Again, this is something that's concerning to me. Keep personal concerns and differences with other board members from impacting the functioning of the board. I really want you guys to think about this and think about how this is manifesting itself to the public. This is so important. If we can take the personalities out of the business when we were on the dais, I think it's going to make a big difference. And I'm not saying everybody's going to be friends. I understand that. I'm not even saying that board members are going to like each other. But you actually have a written policy that says keep personal concerns and differences with other members from impacting the functioning of the board. Carol, I don't know if you can add anything to that as to what you're seeing in other districts.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing. You don't even have to like each other, but you do have to act in a professional manner. Your students deserve that. And your community has that expectation, and they too deserve it. Because when you let personalities get in, you're not making the best decisions potentially.
Now, I'm going to add to what Carol was saying. I know that the board has had similar types of workshops before. I understand that. Now, here's where the difference is going to be. You now have a new school board attorney that's going to hold you accountable to some of these things that we talked about today and some of the policies that we talked about today, and ensure that we're following Robert's rules. And if there's any problems, board members know you can call me. I'll be in the office. You can text me. I'm getting phone calls. I'm getting emails, and I try to respond as quickly as I possibly can. And there's an open door policy for all 7 of you. Whatever I can do to assist all 7 of you to kind of do a little bit of a better job in terms of some of these things that we talked about today, I will do that. Whatever I can do. And I know that the chair is also dedicated and committed to helping this board become a little bit more cohesive so that we can do the business of the district and make sure that we put our students first at all points in time. And here's what I have learned from all 7 of you is that every single one of you cares about our students. Every single one of you advocates for your constituents. That I know. So if we have that starting point, I think we can do a lot of good in terms of governance for the district. And I don't know, Carol, if you have anything to add to that.
I think you said it well.
And the rest of it is with regards to ethical conduct. I think you guys can read that part of it and be familiar with that. I know all of you guys are pretty ethical in doing what you're supposed to do. So at this point, that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity to do that. And thank you very much. And thank you Ms. for joining me today. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Bruno. I think this was excellent and well presented. I want to thank Ms. Cook, but I want to mention to the board that in negotiating, as I had sent out a couple of memos about this, in negotiating to complete our master board training with this seated board, Ms. Cook offered to be with us today and then again on Monday for the governance team evaluations, and count that as our 3rd session for our master board training. So that will leave us with the opportunity to schedule one last session, which will be our wrap up and reeval and next steps piece. So I want to thank you, Carol, also for do that. And this is very important. And I think that as we continue to work more together as a governance team, finishing the master board training will be the icing on the cake. And we really appreciate all of the support we get from FSBA.
You're very welcome.
And then I have one other thing I just wanted to, we had a request from the superintendent's office to have a board liaison and a student representative join the existing pandemic K-12 task force. And I put out some messages about that. We have a few nominations, Ms. Morgan, Ms. Gittens, and Ms. Vaughn. So for good of the order, you can give me your responses and then we'll take a consensus, hopefully at the end of that. So at this time, we will enter good of the order, and I will begin this time with Ms. Morgan.
Okay, I didn't put my name in. I appreciate somebody suggesting that it would be appropriate for me to serve in this role. Other than that, I have no comment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morgan. Okay, Ms. Vaughn.
I did self-nominate, and I felt in part that it behooved me to take on, you're talking about the equity and distributing the various roles, and I do not, nor have I had, since I've been on the school board, a role with FSBA, and the censorship, our part for the censorship education has ended, and I thought this would be one that would be really good for me because I am quite familiar. I would say it's my strength, my familiarity with the schools and issues in the schools.
Thank you very much. And so do you have anything else for the good of the order? Okay, Ms. Gittens.
Yes, thank you. I put my name forward for a couple of reasons. I have been following at the state and national level and FSBA and all of that, a lot of the issues that are happening with the pandemic and COVID-19 because our area is very, very much impacted. Not that the rest of the district is not, but we do have a plethora of our students that are affected with the distance learning, and I've talked to administrators and all about it. And so I really, feel that I would have input from our community on that board. And also, Ms. Fisher, you did mention that someone that has not had an opportunity. I have put my name forward for several things for the census which is still going on, but the FSBA and the legislative, and to this point, I have never been selected for any of those liaison positions. And also, when I was speaking with the superintendent about this task force last week, and in our discussion, he did agree it's an advisory board of sorts, and that if we treat it as an advisory board, we would each have an opportunity to present at least one person from each of our communities to be involved with that. When we had the discussion in the meeting about this, it was tabled, quote unquote, until the superintendent could come back with more information. And yet I see it all just continuing to move along. We got an email saying that it's already been put in force and that we just, want to add some people, and that's fine. I feel that I should be given an opportunity, which I have not been in the last year and a half, to do any type of representation for the board other than that I was the chair for that year. So I would ask that you give me an opportunity. I also have expertise in the education and having taught in this district at all levels. And I feel that that lends itself as well to be able to help in this situation. So I would like to be considered for this opportunity, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Jordan. Anything?
Well, I will help in any manner that I can, but I truthfully, and I think anybody on this board would do an excellent job at whatever we do. But I do think that I would definitely second Ms. Vaughn, because I know that when she gets into something, she really gets into it. And I believe that she would make sure that everybody was kept abreast of everything that was taking place. And as she has said, she really hasn't been able to participate in the others. So I would definitely second Betsy.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, Ms. Jordan, you finished?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, fine. Ms. Patrica?
Yeah, the district-wide representation that Ms. Vaughn would be in a position to provide, I don't see her on my screen right now. Did she leave?
No, she's
Oh, there she is, top right. Sorry, I didn't see you. I think it's important because to Ms. Gitten's point, there are needs that are specific to different areas of the district. And I think that either Ms. Vaughn or Ms. Morgan are in a position to get that feedback from all areas of the district.
okay. Thank you. Then is your vote for Ms. Vaughn?
I would prefer to hear the rest of the comments before I make up my mind.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order, Ms. Patrica? Okay, thank you. Ms. Giovanelli?
Thank you. Actually, I agree with what Ms. Jordan said. I think anyone would be a great liaison, so I'm not opposed to anyone. I had Susan send us like the list of who's on what, task force or what, who are they representing and so forth. So I think the least was Mrs. Gittens and Mrs. Vaughn. I think they were pretty equal on that. And so I don't know. I'll go with consensus. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And yes, Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw my name. Thank you, in light of the other comments made.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. Okay, and then Ms. Gittens?
Yes, thank you. I just did want to point out that Ms. Vaughn did have an opportunity to represent the board as the liaison to the census. And actually, I have not had any. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much. Okay. So then, that being said, and I have no other comments for the good of the order, except a final thank you to Ms. Cook, and to Ms. Bruno for today's workshop, and also looking forward to your participation, Carol, in our Monday workshop. So we'll see you then. And so now I'll just ask for consensus. So those who would like to support Ms. Vaughn being the, oh, I know what I wanted to say. No, we also have a student who's agreed to represent us. And as soon as we get all the information to him, we will have him become part of the conversation. Yes, Ms. Gittens.
I just wanted to make sure too that everyone understands I did not say that I would just be representing my district. I did say that I feel to bring a different perspective, but I do represent all of the districts and not just one.
Yes,
so that is the determination.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and our liaisons to any of the committees you'll be the board liaison, so you'll be representing the entire board, thus the entire community. Okay, so then all those who want to support Ms. Vaughn being the representative board liaison to the task force, pandemic task force, please indicate by raising your thumb up.
I thought we weren't supposed to do that anymore.
Or raise your hand, please, then. Okay. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And so for Ms. Gittens, then, okay, all right. So I think that it's 4 for Ms. Vaughn. So Ms. Vaughn will be our board liaison to the pandemic task force. And thank you all.
Congratulations.
Can I say, and thank you for putting confidence in me. I know Ms. Gittens would be excellent. Actually, anybody on here would be excellent with it. And I promise to bring back lots of reports, seek input. So thank you for putting confidence in me.
Thank you very much. Okay, yes, Ms. Giovanelli. I can't hear you. Ms. Giovanelli, unmute.
I did. Okay, so I just want to add, thank you for saying that, Ms. Vaughn. In fact, we'll want a progress monitoring calendar from you. So I think we do really need to get that going. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jordan.
Do you have the name of the student and how was that student chosen?
Yes, the student is Emery Cavan, and he had been one of our more active and verbal and vocal student representatives, and he's available. And so he's just waiting for the information. But
is he not a senior this year?
Yes, but it did not matter if it was a graduating student.
Oh, because he'll be here, he's staying here?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so Ms. Patrica.
So I know we're really short on time, but I wanted to give you all an update. I was in a meeting last night, a virtual meeting last night with Representative Ray Rodriguez, and he gave an update on the budget. I'm sure y'all know this, but the state of Florida received CARES dollars, and one of the restrictions on those CARES dollars is that it cannot be used to replace lost revenue as a result of COVID. So what are we looking at in terms of a budget here in Florida? Representative Rodriguez indicated that he saw very little impact because we have sufficient reserves on hand to get us through the budget year we're in right now. And there is significant movement at the federal level to either take away that restriction that the revenues already received cannot be used for revenue replacement purposes, or new CARES dollars that might be coming out would not have that restriction. So the state of Florida is feeling a little bit better about the budget than I think we all were at our last meeting. I don't want to offer false hope, but that is literally what he said. He does not, there is no indication that they're going to go into special session for a budget. If anything, they would come back in the fall and take money back, which is something we did discuss. And there is a political element to that because, of course, elections will be over at that time. It's easier for them to cut the budget once elections are over. But I was significantly encouraged by what he said yesterday based on the movement of the Fed. In addition to that, I attended a meeting last week of the state chiefs of education from Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. And there was also the federal equivalent of that position who was in on that meeting. And he too indicated that there's significant movement at the federal level to provide significant funding to public education, given the renewed, I think, recognition that our societies do not function if we don't have public schools that are running. So I wanted to share that with you so that you could take the deep breath that I took after hearing from Representative Rodriguez last week, or last night. Hopefully that will give you some sense of calm as you go into the weekend. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Well, thank you very much for providing those updates. That's important for all of us to be aware of. And I know that Superintendent Atkins and Dr. Desamore have further comments, and I don't know if you heard at the beginning, Superintendent Atkins did have a meeting with the county manager, and so they talked a little bit about that. So we'll be hearing more as time progresses and more opportunities come forward with that CARES funding. Okay, and then I think, Ms. Jordan, do you still have your hand up? No? Okay, then. Then if there is no other business, we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Stay well, have a good weekend, and we'll see you all on Monday.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Ms. Bruno.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. It was a
Good to
great
see
meeting.
you all.
Awesome job, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Carol.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Have a good weekend.
You also.